Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of The Collective. My name is Michelle Turner, and today's focus is on discrimination with Black hair. It is Women's Month, but more specifically, we're going to talk about the C.R.O.W.N Act, what that means in the state of Connecticut, and what it looks like nationwide. And how did we get to this point that we actually have to pass a law so that women and men who wear their hair naturally and are of color aren't discriminated against? In the late 2010s, there were several incidents where Black hair, or should I say how Black hair is worn, came to the forefront in American culture. When there seemed to be incidents of students being put out of school, or worse, having their hair altered against their will for wearing their hair either braided or in dreadlocks. I think the one that comes to mind for me is the high school student in New Jersey, the wrestler in 2018, where they cut his dreadlocks right there on the spot in the competition. Not to mention the history of Black hair, from laws where Black women had to wear a headdress to signify that they were part of the so called enslaved class, to the rise of the straightening comb in the beginning of the 20th century, to the Black Power movement in the 60s, to assimilation in the 80s as part of what was believed to be a social and economic advancement by wearing your hair Eurocentrically. Today, we're in the fall of natural hair. Acceptance in the Black community of natural hair, as well as in other cultures of their natural hair. But with that comes incidents of hair discrimination. As far back as 1976, whereas in the case of Jenkins versus Blue Cross Mutual Hospital, where it was declared that under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, can you imagine? They were entitled to wear afros. The military bucked the trend or began to ease restrictions on natural hair in 2017. Fast forward to now, where the past 2 to 3 years, the C.R.O.W.N Act, which stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair, stands to prohibit race-based hair discrimination, which is, quote, the denial of employment or educational opportunities because of hair texture or protective hairstyles, including braids, locks, twists, or Bantu knots. The C.R.O.W.N Act was signed into law in California first, July 3rd, 2019, and passed in the Congressional House of Representatives on September 21st, 2020. It still sits in the U.S. Senate. But in Connecticut about 3 weeks ago, State Representative Robin Porter and her colleagues in the State House and Senate put the C.R.O.W.N Act on the books in Connecticut. It is law, and the eighth state in the United States to pass this act. We welcome to the collective 3 women who made this happen in Connecticut, and one of them is involved in getting it passed around the country and on Capitol Hill. State Representative Robin Porter has represented the 94th district, which includes the New Haven and Hamden neighborhoods, since 2014. She is chair of the Labor Committee in the Senate. Melissa Johnson is the director of community. And forgive me, Melissa, my cards are messed up and I don't have my glasses on. But work with me, folks. Melinda Johnson is described as an advocate and innovator and is the director of community engagement and advocacy for the YWCA Hartford region, a spiritual leader and leading lady in the Urban Hope of Refuge Church, and a member of the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women. And Ajuabi Asamoah is the principal behind ABA Consulting and is a seasoned executive and award-winning impact strategist and leading authority on racial equity. She serves in the Biden-Harris administration as the National Advisor for Black Engagement and has traveled the country in support of the C.R.O.W.N. Act. So, ladies, forgive me for my bumbling. My glasses are on one side and I'm on the other. But good morning to you all.
Good
And
morning.
thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here today on The Collective. So I'm going to put this one out to the group. And I want to ask the question, is black hair political? Is it or is it not?
So I'll take a stab. Good morning, sisters. It is good to be with you all, albeit virtually. It's always great to be in the space with my sisters. I just wanted to note one quick correction. I actually do not work for the administration, but I proudly served as the National Advisor for Black Engagement for the campaign and also led Black engagement for the inauguration. In terms of whether or not hair is political, I think that answer depends on who is answering. So for some people, absolutely hair is political. For other people, it is an accessory. For some people, it is a display of cultural pride. For some people, it is something that they take and do what they will with it. So I think, and for some people, it's just hair. So that's also important to note. So I think that answer depends on who you are asking the question, because for so many different people, our hair means different things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that probably comes from the civil rights movement. You know, when you had the Angela Davis and Kathleen Cleaver and yes, Robin, and even Erica Hudgens with those big, huge, powerful afros, right? That everybody emulated. Because I even talked to a couple of relatives and I said, well, why'd you wear your hair like that? Just out of curiosity. And they said, well, not only was it the style, but it represented power. It gave us a certain amount of power as we walked into a room. And it didn't matter what our position was. People knew that A, we were proud of our natural hair, and B, we had something to say without necessarily coming into the room and making that statement.
Yes. And I can attest to that, Michelle. Just real quick, I mean, you're conjuring up some memories for me. You know, I can remember the first day that I decided to pick my natural hair out and actually wear it to the Capitol while we were in session. And it was a representative in particular, a Republican colleague of mine. And I'll never forget what she said to me through, a little later in the day, we ran across each other. And she looked at me and she said, wow. She said, that's a powerful statement. She said that, So it's true, I think it is political, whether we see it as political or not, because life is political. Before I started doing this work, I would tell people all the time, I'm not in politics. That ain't got nothing to do with me. And then I made it to the State House, and I tell you, every single committee that we have in that building touches your life from A to Z.
Yes. Yes.
Appropriations, banking, commerce, education, finance, you name it. Like human services, anything that has to do with the way we live our lives. Those policies derive out of each and every state house, and even at the local level in City Hall.
At the local level, yeah.
But I just wanted to say that you're absolutely right. That afro says power. You don't have to open your mouth. People know that you. I mean, it takes confidence to show up in spaces when it's not traditionally or historically accepted.
Especially, during that time period when women were really just coming into their own, into the forefront, women, period. You think in terms of women going out in the streets and protesting for the right to equal pay. Black women saying we not only want equal pay, but we want to be seen and heard and respected as an equal. And then for you to run into a room or walk into a room and people see this huge big afro, it's like, well, wait a minute. Everybody's caught off guard.
I think Representative Porter. Go ahead. I'm sorry, sis.
No, I was just going to say, and when you speak, people definitely listen.
I was just going to add, I think Representative Porter is also right. Again, it depends on who you ask, but for some, absolutely, our hair is political. But sometimes it's other people who make our hair political. I might just want to rock faux locks one day because I like my style.
Right.
But that's not to take away the significance of our hair. We know that traditionally our hair has represented different things. I'm going back to my culture as a a West African, as a proud Ghanaian. So hair means so many different things. It may represent your status in terms of your marital status. It could symbolize your socioeconomic status. I mean, when you think about how our hairstyles have, continued to evolve, again, the answer depends on who you ask because it means so many things. But absolutely, there are times in which our hair is 100% political, and I am wearing it like this because I want you to see my power.
Right.
So I've rocked an afro. I have rocked a blowout like I am now. I have rocked braids. I have rocked twists just a couple of weeks ago. But really, the movement is about preserving and protecting our rights to rock our crowns how we see fit, particularly wearing our hair as it grows out of our head and in protective styles to maintain the health of our hair.
Yeah, because go ahead, Melinda.
No, I was going to say to all that has been said thus far, I think when we look at the fact that hair is not political in Black cultures, it's political when we come in confrontation with a mainstream culture, especially here in America, where the culture that's been established is Eurocentric because of the experience of Europeans coming here, slavery. That whole history is what makes Black expression, not just our hair, but Black expression political. But when you look at other countries where Black people are the dominant culture that's there, when you look at the West Indies, when you look at African countries, when you look at some of these other regions, then you realize that that's not an issue in those spaces as much as it is here, because dominant culture influences what we deem as acceptable and what we deem as right or the best or the model or the standard. And I think through the C.R.O.W.N Act, through the work that Adwoa has been doing on a national scale, through the championship of Representative Porter here in our state, we put a stamp on it saying that dominant culture no longer gets to dictate how we show up in our identity, and it no longer gets to restrict the full expression of ourselves.
Absolutely.
And we're saying that's not dominant culture too. So we're challenging all of it and saying that it is one, African aesthetic is beautiful. Our hair is beautiful. The way it grows out of its head is beautiful. But we're also shifting both policy and culture and ensuring that it is also Black public opinion that is influencing public policy.
And it also affects us economically, right? Because we know, and one of the things that I had totally forgotten about, but in doing research last night, is how many women on the job receive these so-called rules, right? When they come into the office and their hair looks a certain way, like the third or fourth day, they get this little piece of paper from HR saying, this is our dress code, right? This is what we look like in this office. And I had forgotten about that. I remember working in the 80s, right? And because of whatever DNA processes in my bloodline, I could not necessarily wear a perm, right? And I couldn't do a blowout because a couple of days later, it would look like an afro. So I did this curly thing and I put color in it and went to work. And everybody in the newsroom was quiet. I mean, like dead silence. And I'm walking around being myself, talking and working. And so I had a colleague pull me to the side and say, why did you change your hair? We're not sure how to receive you because you've changed your hair. And I was taken aback because this was really, in thinking about it, my first time working in a newsroom that was mostly white. Most of the spaces that I had worked in had been African American, Black. So it was never an issue, as you said, Melinda, about my hair. Whatever I did with it was what I did with it. But now I go to work and all of a sudden I've got a different environment and people aren't sure how to react to me. And so in looking at what one of the things I saw last night is that 80% of African American women feel if they change their hair, that they will be more accepted at work. So that shows the importance of having a C.R.O.W.N Act in place. For me, I didn't change my hair. And I went back into the newsroom and announced, listen, this is my hair. This is the way I want to wear it. I don't comment about you all getting haircuts, hair color, wearing spikes, wearing anything that you'd like to wear. Just know that this is my personal choice and it has nothing to do with me as a professional. Do you think the C.R.O.W.N Act would change this in our society? Because it seems like, and Representative Porter, you and I talked, there was a young woman who recently faced this on the job.
Yes, that's correct. And I do. I mean, to answer your question, absolutely believe that the C.R.O.W.N Act will change it because it is changing it. What I found really interesting, and it kind of goes back to what Melinda said, I think we take some things for granted, or it's just some things we don't think about, right? That we assume other people know about us. And as we introduce this legislation and begin to, talk about it and explain to people what it was, where it had derived from, that it was actually a national movement going on, that this was a national problem. And a lot of my white counterparts were like, God, I didn't even know you guys went through this. Like, really? Is there issues with your hair? And I'm like, I had to think about it. It's not that white women don't have issues with their hair. They have bad hair days.
Right,
right. They don't always get it right. But when they show up in spaces, they're not discriminated against. It's not held against them, right? And when we show up, we're expected to conform. I mean, first is women. Women have always been under societal pressure to look a certain way. But then you add a layer of blackness onto that, and you're taking it to a whole nother level. I mean, even I was told back in 2014 when I first started doing this work, one of the first things I was told, and as a matter of fact, out of the people that told me, one of the people was a Black woman, that worked very closely with me, getting me elected. And she was like, oh, you're going to have to settle on a hairstyle, sis. Like, you can't keep showing up with these different hairstyles. One day it's a blowout, it's straight, like Aja was wearing her hair. Then my hair would look like Melinda's, because I would wet it and let it dry and it would just curl up. And then some days I'd pick it out. I'd go get me some box braids, some twists. And I refuse, like you. I'm like, you know what? I am my hair. My hair speaks about how I choose to show up and what it is I'm saying. And when I showed up with my afro, I was feeling powerful, and when I showed up with my braids, there was a feeling that went along with that as well. So I do believe that the C.R.O.W.N Act is changing the dialogue, changing the narrative, educating people, creating a safe space for people to ask questions. They felt comfortable because it was on the table. We had committee meetings, we had public hearings. Aja and Melinda showed up last year along with a host of people. Black women took over the Capitol last year. And 2 or 3 of us show up. It's like, what's going on?
Right.
So just imagine, a whole crew of us show up and we're showing up to represent our crowns and say that, we want the liberty in spaces outside of our home and our comfort zone where we can be comfortable, right? Wearing our crown however we choose. So
that's absolutely right. I think you are referencing the study that was commissioned by Dove, which is a co-founder of the C.R.O.W.N Coalition, who I will do this work on behalf of.
And I was gonna ask you to give a history of that. So
sure. So if I could just sort of walk you through how it came to be, essentially. So we know that there has been a long-standing and problematic practice of racial discrimination in the form of hair discrimination. It is not something new. It is not something I personally discovered. However, in working on this issue with my colleagues, what we decided to do essentially was to, one, have the research conducted. So my brilliant colleagues who are attorneys, William Sherman, and Sonny Harris provided a legal guidance memo that would inform our work in terms of how we were drafting the bill. Blackness is pervasive. It is not new. It shows up in many forms. You talked about the economic impact of absolutely hair discrimination impacts our upward mobility. We have had disproportionately Black women, although not exclusively, because it also impacts Black men and absolutely Black children.
Absolutely.
Our adults in the workplace have offers of employment rescinded. We have had our folks have been passed over for promotions. We have had people be on the receiving end of these, I won't say sanctions, but, being told that the way that you are showing up to work is inappropriate. And somehow there's this idea that our hair in its natural state is unprofessional. So we are challenging all of that. And to your point that, and to just sort of reiterate what Representative Porter said, through this movement, because that's what it is. It's not about an isolated bill. It is about a national movement. We are, at the same time that we are shifting policy, we are also shifting culture. Mainstream media was not talking about natural hair and protective styles prior to the C.R.O.W.N. Act. Now, it's Women's History Month, so I need to acknowledge now Madam Secretary Marcia Fudge, because it was during her tenure as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, along with support from her colleague, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, that they then sent a letter signed by all of the female members of the Congressional Black Caucus to the then Secretary of Defense, challenging this proposed ban on certain hairstyles. So it is not something that is new. We have known about it, for forever, because we are the ones who have been on the receiving end of it. This issue predates me even working on it. However, through the C.R.O.W.N. Act, we are outlawing hair discrimination by categorizing it as racial discrimination, amending the definition of race to include the traits historically associated with it, such as hair texture and protective styles, which is an existing protected class. Race is an existing protected class. So what we are doing, again, is shifting both policy and culture. To Representative Porter's point, we are demonstrating our power and our ability to be able to influence policy. She said, when 2 or 3 of us show up, they're starting to look around. But 100 of us show up, and 2,000 of us start to write letters, and 200,000 of us start to sign petitions, that's a different ballgame. So we are challenging these notions of Eurocentric standards of beauty that perpetuate inequity and equality and injustice in our workplaces and our schools. And I guess at some point we'll talk about that. But we are challenging all of that and ensuring that it is also Black public opinion that influences public policy.
And let me just say also that that's what makes the C.R.O.W.N. Act unique, because it's tied into our physicality. Am I correct in saying that?
Absolutely. Our hair is a part of who we are. Again, it is part of our identity. You can't dismiss our hair from our bodies, and there has been the policing of Black bodies, which is a whole nother issue.
That's a whole nother conversation. Absolutely.
So our hair is part of our bodies, and so we are saying, no, we will not stand for it.
And I think what's additionally powerful is now creating a narrative around Black identity that comes from us. It's not a narrative that comes from the white space or from a Eurocentric perspective, but it's true to us. And the reason why I lift that up as an important idea is because I actually, in my professional experience, do not recall in professional settings having someone reprimand me about my hair. And I'll tell you why. Because the deeper rooted issue for me in my personal experience was I was already cultured and taught and bred and raised that when you go for any kind of professional speaking opportunities, when you go for an interview, when you go for anything that puts you in the presence of other people, straighten your hair. Make sure that it's up. Make sure it's in a bun. Make sure it's in a ponytail. Make sure it's tightly kept. Make sure it's neatly kept. And that kind of indoctrination to Eurocentric culture made it unnecessary for me to even be presented with a policy. But it also made me have to suppress a part of my identity. And as Aja was talking about us also being able to speak to the conversation regarding schools. When we talk to our young women at the YWLC, our young girls between the ages of 12 and 18, they were speaking of experiences in school where they were told that their hair was inappropriate, but they were also speaking about experiences at home where Black women, women of color, are telling them ahead of time how to prepare for these encounters. So changing that narrative through this legislation is so important, because at the forefront, we're being affirmed in our identity before we're presented with these issues.
We have to break here. We'll come back and we'll continue the conversation. This is The Collective on WSME Enlightenment Radio. We're back, and The Collective on WSME. The audio portion of the show will air tomorrow at 6 p.m. So if you don't catch it today, you can definitely hear the audio, and it lives on YouTube. So probably Monday, Tuesday next week, you can catch it on this version on YouTube as well. Back in the studio with State Representative of Connecticut's 94th District, Robin Porter. Belinda Johnson is the Director of Community Engagement and Advocacy for the YWCA Hartford region, and Ajua B. Asamoah. I'm hoping I'm getting that right.
You got it, Sarah. You got it.
Okay. All right, Sarah. Is involved on the national level in getting the C.R.O.W.N Act passed. And I welcome you all again. So to Melinda's point, when you have to suppress yourself, of course, that doesn't make you the best employee, because now you're thinking in terms of, oh my goodness, I have got to go back in this place and work. How important was it, and I'm going to put this to the group, how important was it to get others to understand and see how this affects people of color? Because I think when you talk hair, I think people kind of brush it aside. I don't think they really look at it as something that is a real issue, especially for people of color. And, I've had it said or heard it said, this is just another race card issue. You're throwing down the race card. Oh, you don't like my hair, so now I'm being discriminated against. And it's not necessarily a race card issue. Anybody?
I'm happy to jump in here. I was raised by a very proud Pan-African who spent his life working as a scholar activist, advancing the policies and approach to liberation from Kwame Nkrumah. So I did not have that thought that I must change who I am in order to conform. The idea of being a proud African is something I was just raised with. There's a lot to unpack here as we're having this conversation, and if I may, I want to talk about the importance of the effect that it has on our young people as well.
Absolutely, because most of the cases that I read yesterday dealt with young people wearing their hair in a natural state and being put out of school. And even again, I bring up the issue of the young man who was the wrestler in New Jersey in 2018, and they cut his locks right there on the spot before he got on the mat to compete. So this definitely has ramifications for our youth.
Absolutely. And I want to stress that, because you said young man and then you said youth, and I want to be clear that these are our young people. So they're not adults. He wasn't a man. He was a student. He was a boy. And just for additional context, all of my work is rooted in fighting anti-Blackness and advancing racial equity, which for me, that is what this movement is about. Again, I share that anti-Blackness is pervasive. And for most of this country's existence, it has been legal. When I think about the work that I've done at the local, state, and federal levels, because it's important to note that as we are passing this, state to state, also to ensure that it is outlawed at the federal level in the United States Congress, in which one chamber it passed, the United States House of Representatives, under the leadership of former Congressman Cedric Richmond last year. So yes, we know that it certainly impacts our adults and the individuals and the families that have been impacted in terms of our finances. But I think about the impact that it has had on our students and the fact that too many of our children have missed school or have had negative educational experiences as a result of hair discrimination. I think about the student who was sent home in tears because she wore braids that were deemed a violation of school rules. I think about the student who you referenced, a student wrestler who was forced to make a decision he should have never, ever, ever had to make, and to decide between, on the spot, I should add, decide on the spot whether to have his locks viciously and randomly attacked from someone with just scissors, just cutting it, no styling, anything of that sort, just viciously having his locks cut and his identity attacked, or to forfeit a match they had earned the right to participate in. And then I think about another student who was told that he could not participate in his graduation ceremony with his friends as a result of having locks, which for him was a display of cultural pride given his identity. That is problematic. Now, I wear a couple different hats. We talked about a couple in terms of political and social impact strategists, but as a licensed behavior specialist who started working at the intersection of mental health and education, there is a deeper problem here. The psychological impact of being told that the way you were born is not okay, that the way your hair grows out of its head is not okay. When you are going into school environments where the culture and climate is not conducive to what we are even asking our students to do, and that's to perform academically. They should be nurtured and they should be able to thrive and be who they are and show up as themselves. The long-standing impact on one's self-esteem is something that we also must bring to this conversation. Because again, as Melinda and Representative Porter have pointed out as well, these Eurocentric standards of acceptance of beauty are problematic. We cannot continue to let our children believe that they must adhere to them and stand up to them. But we have to be the ones to take that charge. And particularly that's what this work is about. It is about ensuring that our kids have a healthy self-esteem, that their perceptions of self-worth are impacted by others telling them that the way that they were born is essentially not okay. So again, shifting policy and culture here.
And Melinda and Representative Porter, what did it take on you all's end to get this to the Capitol? What was the crux of your work like in Connecticut?
Well, for me, I mean, the student that you're talking about, the wrestler, is actually Andrew Johnson, and he really was the fire in my belly. He was 16 years old, wrestler, stopped midway during his match and told that, you know, and I watched the video and I literally wept, physically wept.
Yeah.
My son had locks down his back. My daughter has locks down her back now. I'm in the process. His Crown Act has done something. You know, my head was thin, right? I'm letting it grow because the only thing I've never done with my hair is lock it. So guess what? What better time than 2021, Connecticut being the first state this year to pass the Crown Act?
Yes,
8 states to join the coalition. I think I should mark 2021 with the beginning of my process in my hair, right? And that was it for me. So, you know, once we really I made the decision to run it through labor. It was just a matter of talking to people and educating people and explaining to folks exactly what this was. I started doing exactly what you were doing last night. I started delving deeper into the issue and finding that this really dated back to like 2013 with a sister who was denied employment because of her locks, right? And then
Yes.
as you gradually come to the present, you start to realize all the cases that Ajua just mentioned, the students and what this did to them. And for me, it was sacrilegious to watch what happened to Andrew Johnson. It was not just emasculation, it was a violation. I mean, in our culture, our crowns are sacred. And it cut deep for me because, like I said, both of my kids, have locked their hair. I know the labor of love that goes into making that happen. And to watch a white woman take scissors to this young black boy's head, his crown, his sacred crown, right?
And there's a lot that goes with that,
With
right?
white men standing around him, that was just too reminiscent.
Right.
Yeah, that was too reminiscent of what they've always been able to do to us, right? And it was sending a message. Let's not forget the subliminal messages that go with this. And it was traumatizing. Ajua talked about the
Yes.
impact that this has on our people. I
Yes.
mean, it was bullying. They were bullying him. He was being bullied. And our kids are bullied in school. Our kids are further
Right.
traumatized. We're born into trauma, right? But now our children go to school and they're traumatized. And the interesting thing that Representative Miller, she made a point during the debate on the floor. And she said, if you're telling me my hair is not good enough, it's not tidy,
Mm.
it's not clean, it's not acceptable, then what you're saying is my skin, the color of my skin is not tidy, it's not acceptable. And I was like, wow, because when you think about it, this hair is tied to our skin. This is our hair. This isn't the hair that white people have, unless they got some of our black blood running through their veins, right?
Right.
A lot of them
Right.
do. So for me, getting it done, it was just really a matter of doing the homework, doing the research, educating myself further, so that I could educate people on, why this is important. Because that was really the question at the Capitol. Why is this important? And we had a couple of colleagues that, they was like, we got other things we need to be doing. This isn't
Right.
important.
Right.
So and some of them still feel that way. And it ain't about changing hearts and minds. I'm a lawmaker. It's about legislating policy that is equitable and treats everyone the same. So if they can show up with their hair wet, blue, purple, green, pink, why can't we just show up with our hair simply the way it grows out of our head? And I'll let Melinda respond as well, because Melinda played a very pivotal part in building the coalition here in Connecticut and making sure at the grassroots level we had what I call outside interference, right? That is what really moves legislation into building, the people power. And that is what Queen Melinda showed up with, the queendom.
The queendom, yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Representative Porter. I think what I've learned over these years is that legislation is passed best or most effectively with the support of community. Now, historically, legislation has usually been supported by white communities, because those are the communities that are most aware of the process. And so the role that I played in this really was in partnership. One, having the privilege and honor to partner with Representative Porter and with Ajua, and to glean from their wisdom and the strategy. But then being a partner to our community. When Representative Porter says we called on the queendom, we really did. We called on, we went looking for every Black woman we knew that was a leader in the community. And maybe not in the form and fashion that we're accustomed to when we talk about larger businesses and organizations.
Yeah,
and
or even
power.
the traditional role of leadership.
Right, but we knew the women that our communities trust. We knew the women that were running grassroots organizations for women's empowerment. We knew the women that were doing the hairdressers in our local community, the ones that were technically the counselors of our women, because while they were braiding hair, they were listening to the struggles that they were going through with your kids.
Right, right.
So we knew the women to call to say, listen, this is an issue that pertains to us. This is an issue that can change things for our children, for generations to come. Call your cousins and them, call your girlfriends, call your sisters, and let's make this happen. beyond that, beyond the getting the energy and the passion together, the other part was making the process easy. So the legislative process, honestly, is cumbersome for the average Jane and Joe that's just trying to participate and help make something happen. So part of the work that we did was in creating tools to assist people and guide them through that process. So making sure that they had a testimony guide that kind of encapsulated and abbreviated some of the more complicated structures that were in place in the actual bill. Even a bill reading the at the time it was House Bill 6515, going to find that, pressing that button, and then reading the bill line by line, that's cumbersome for someone that's not accustomed to that system. So being able to have a fact sheet that breaks down that information in a way that's more digestible, and then giving people the ability to know when to act. Because if I am working a 9 to 5, raising my kids, and trying to just function in my community, I don't have the time to keep watch of how this bill is moving through the tracks that are necessary to get it passed, and to also be on watch and be a guard for who is in opposition and who needs to be spoken with in order for us to make sure that we can get this thing through. So making sure that the community was mobilized and making sure that they had the tools that they needed to do that was one part. The second part was on a grass tops level, working with our other YWCAs throughout Connecticut, and making sure that as a sisterhood, we were pushing on the issue together. I had an encounter with an individual at the public hearing, a representative that actually, not a representative, a senator, no, a representative that actually was a little bit combative, honestly, with a great deal of the women that were on the line to testify in support of the C.R.O.W.N. Act. And his opposition was, isn't this an issue of education? Isn't it that people just need to be educated about how not to move forward with these policies and have these policies in place in their businesses? Isn't this an issue of implicit bias? And honestly, we know that ignorance is more than one thing. Ignorance is not just the I didn't know. Ignorance is the choice of ignoring information that you're presented with.
Absolutely.
And, legislation puts standards in place to blot out that ignorance. This is something you can no longer ignore because it's law. And we had to organize as YWs to say, okay, that individual is outside of my caption area. I'm just Hartford region, but I can call my YW sisters down in the other areas and say, can you please get your representative because he's out of line. So it really took connection, it took relationship, it took collaboration, it took listening, it took strategy, it took wisdom. But none of that would have been possible without the local queens that organized their courts and made it happen.
As I like to say, they are Black famous.
Yes.
White people don't necessarily have to know them, but everybody in the community knows who they are and respects their power and their leadership, whatever form it comes in. So I always say, because somebody says, oh, well, I don't know them. And I'm like, because they're Black famous.
And that's what we have with our Queen Adjoa B. Asamoah, because I have to tell you, when this thing got birthed and we started moving it in Connecticut, I mean, at the drop of a dime in 2 seconds flat, she was on a plane. I was like, what? You gonna make it? She showed up. She had trinkets. I mean, we had our hoodies with our little
I saw the pictures.
Look,
I saw the stuff on social media. Like, they are moving it.
Girl, she came and made us straight legit. Like, she donned us with the crown for real. And I think that is really what took us to the next level, because she has that national recognition. She's laid the track. She has national connections. And that goes a long way, and Melinda talked about some of the other grassroots organizations, Voices of Women of Color out of Hartford, the AKAs and the Deltas. I mean, like, when we talk about the queendom, the queendom showed up. And I couldn't let that go without saluting my sister Adjoa, because she took it to a whole nother level. And I'm happy for both of us. The icing on this cake is that she is a New Haven resident, right?
Yes.
And
the
representative of that district. So talk about God bringing things full circle and just making it sweet. That was what really, it's still to deal with so much sweetness, knowing that, Adjoa was nationally a part of this movement, but also locally and intimately connected to this movement.
And Ajua, we are 8 states down and 40 plus to go. So what's the strategy?
The strategy is to do what we have been doing. So of course, I developed the legislative strategy for it, but it was for empowering our people. So yes, I lead the movement on behalf of the C.R.O.W.N Coalition in terms of the, working with the members and the C.R.O.W.N Coalition, which is made up of, I should note, the organizations. I called my friends who are the leaders of organizations, many of which I belong to personally, and said, will you stand with us? So ranging from NAACP to Legal Defense Fund to Deltas to AKAs to the Links to the National Council of Negro Women, et cetera. That is the coalition. And part of the strategy in calling my friends who lead those organizations was so that we could activate at the local level. So leading the work at the national level means ensuring that the people who are doing this work at the state level are empowered and have the support. So for me, not wearing my C.R.O.W.N Act hat per se, but as someone who is personally committed to increasing the political literacy in our community, to ensuring that civic engagement goes beyond one particular bill. We know that it does not start or stop with voting. This is it. Being a part of the lawmaking process is it. Rallying our folks around issues, policies that either serve us well, as in this case, Representative Porter is far too humble. Because yes, this is about the C.R.O.W.N Act, and I'm eternally grateful that my hometown member is the one who championed this issue, being the first this year in 2021, and to have done what she did during Black History Month and then to usher it across the finish line. And Women's History Month is just telling. But she represents and truly embodies what it is that I am working for personally at the national level, is to ensure that our elected officials are empowered, knowing that you are not in there by yourself. So yes, we elect you, but then we can't not see you again until it's time for re-election. Our responsibility is to say, we got you, which is exactly what happened. You go in there and you put forth policy,
right?
Best interest of our community. We are responsible for showing up. We are responsible for testifying and submitting those letters and letting you know that, yes, we empowered you to go in there and make law on our behalf, but it is our responsibility to be civically engaged. So for me, being a part of and also witnessing this happen in Connecticut is exactly what I want to happen nationwide. So you talked about what it is moving forward. I am working state by state to ensure that we are not only outlawing hair discrimination by, again, passing the C.R.O.W.N Act, but that our people are engaged civically, that we are participating in the lawmaking process and full recognition that this is, those elected officials work for us until we decide they don't. And so it's our responsibility to ensure that we are stating where it is we are on certain policies.
Ladies, we've got 2 more minutes. So I want you to tell the public how they can support the C.R.O.W.N Act and what they can do. I don't know if we can sign a petition. I saw that Dove does have a petition. And since it's already law in Connecticut, what else can we do as the public, as a community, to make sure that A, this law stays enforceable, and B, that everybody knows that it's on the books?
First thing I would say is something that I've been doing is like contacting my family in South Carolina, North Carolina, I mean, like in places where we know this is not passed, and asking them to lobby their legislators and to educate their legislators. Look what Connecticut just did. As a matter of fact, not just Connecticut, but California, New York,
Right.
New Jersey,
Right.
Maryland, Virginia,
Right.
Colorado, and Washington, right? Like we got 8 states. Can we be the 9th? And I think that's a great way to get people, Ajua, as she said, civically engaged. Folks that might not necessarily do this, right? This is a great cause. It strikes close to home, and people can feel passion around it. And when you are passionate, that changes everything.
One thing that folks can do is to get in touch with me. I work with a small but mighty crew on this every day. And that's Kelly and Orlena and Marcy and Melanie and Stacy. We are working diligently, but I am working also strategically. So I am looking at states. One of the things that I do as a politico is I do things like study votes and figure out, do I have the votes to pass it? Will this be an education awareness campaign? In some states it will pass this year. In some states I have some additional work to ensure that we have the votes in order to pass it. But we're doing things like resolutions and ordinances and educating people. So to really work with us at the national level to ensure that the strategy that we are employing, because for me, this is all about strategy, to ensure that the strategy that we are employing is actually going to advance the work. So please reach out to me. My contact information accessible via social media for sure. I might not respond right away, but I will respond. And to figure out, where you might be able to play an instrumental role in terms of the national strategy that I have, because I'm working in Delaware, Pennsylvania is on my list, Louisiana is on my list, Tennessee is on my list, Michigan is on my list, but I do have a strategy for it. So I want to ensure that we are doing this in a way that is strategic so that we can outlaw this state by state. So work collaboratively with at the national level and the C.R.O.W.N Coalition, and we will continue to do this thing.
And Melinda, what's your suggestion? And you have the last word.
Well, I'll just echo everything that has been said thus far, and to encourage our community members to know your rights and make sure that your children know their rights, because the power of law is in your ability to call somebody into accountability when there is discrimination at hand. So know your rights, make sure your children know their rights, and stand proudly, confidently, knowing that this law is in place and we got your back.
I want to thank you all.
Thank you all for being here today. It's really important. I have always worn my hair natural. The protective style is just for that, to let my hair grow back in the way that I love it to be, which is its natural self. And I hope to see you, State Representative Porter, with those dreads. I can't wait.
Yes. That's right, Audra. There's history around that word, that they coined, and we dropped the dread because it's not a dread to us, and we call them locks. Yeah, but thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be amongst my sisters on the battlefield. This thing we do to make it happen, and to show up and liberate spaces. And what a blessing to have been able to pass this legislation, which creates liberating spaces, not just for men and women, but especially for our babies. And I think the message is, you are fearfully and wonderfully made from the crown of your head to the soles of your feet. So stand in your liberty. And on that note, I'm out.
Absolutely. State Representative
so
Robin Porter of the 94th District, Melinda Johnson, the Director of Community Engagement with the YWCA in Hartford, and Audra B. Azamola of ABA Consulting. Thank you all for being on the collective. I hope to have you back later in the year. Please continue the good fight.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
This has been the collective on WSME Enlightenment Radio.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to run now. Appreciate you.